Hello Rayclast, welcome to the Path of Exile build guide for my Facebreaker Cyclone Slayer. This is my second build of the Keepers of the Flame League, and it has turned out to be pretty darn awesome. Honestly, way better than I thought it was going to be. I have tried Facebreakers, or at least theory-crafted Facebreakers, pretty much every league for a long time, just because I think it's a cool item, but Unarmed has just kind of been left in the dust for a long time. However, there are a couple new things that came in with this league, with some extra flat physical damage on them and some good buffs. And pretty much any time that generic flat physical damage is added, I'm always thinking about Facebreakers and thinking how I can work it into a Facebreaker build. And after my first build of this league, I wanted my second build to be something that required a lot less button pressing, because there was a lot of button pressing in my first build, and I wanted something a little more chill. So I was thinking Cyclone would fit the bill really well for that, and Cyclone and Facebreakers are an excellent combo together. This character has turned out really solid all around, and in particular, I'm just really blown away by how well the damage ended up being. As usual, you can find a Path of Building link in the description for this video. There aren't a lot of notes or anything in it, but I have at least filled out the configuration tab appropriately and put a couple of notes in the custom modifiers box there, explaining why the couple of custom modifiers that I've put in there have been added to account for things that are not directly supported by Path of Building yet. So for damage, this build I rate it very highly. 5-star damage on this one, 50 million plus DPS pretty solidly. And honestly, it's like real DPS because you're cycloning, so your damage uptime is pretty much constant. So very, very solid damage overall, as you'll be able to see in the videos. Clear, I would rate it pretty average, mostly just because we're hindered by pretty slow traversal speed. That's just the nature of Cyclone, even with the Stampede. But I will say it is very smooth, chill, comfortable clear. Our AoE hits the majority of the screen, as you can see, and it's just consistent, always going AoE, and you never have to stop moving, because you're cycloning and frost blinking, and those are the only two buttons you press. Call it like a 1.5 button build, because you're just holding down Cyclone the entire time, and frost blinking when it's off cooldown. So, not super fast clear, but very smooth, comfortable clear. For tankiness, I would rate this build pretty highly. I think I'm going to give it like a 4 out of 5 on the tankiness. It's not like a Giga Tank designed kind of character where you're just going to stand in everything and not care. But it is very solid defenses overall, and honestly, this is one of the few builds I've ever made that I would realistically call hardcore viable. I think you could totally play this in hardcore if you wanted to. My only deaths on this character are a couple during the campaign, just because I'm scrubcore and was rushing the campaign with random twink gear, with no defenses and minimal resistances, just all the speed things. And then other than those 2 deaths in the campaign, my only deaths on this character have been in Uber boss fights. So I farmed all the way up to level 98, mostly doing relatively juiced Abyss plus Beyond for XP farming, and then a goodly amount of currency farming doing my 8-mod corrupted tier 16 harvest farm. No deaths through any of that, and barely ever even see my health move off of full. The build's got really solid defenses all around, a 65-65 block, almost 60k armor, 5 endurance charges, 23 fortify stacks, reduced damage taken while leeching from Slayer, all that good stuff together. You just don't take much damage on the build in general. So, like I said, only deaths other than during the campaign have been on Uber bosses. So if you wanted to play this in hardcore, I think you totally could. Finally, as for cost, this is a pretty expensive build to get to the point that I have it here. I have a decently over 100 divines invested into this character. It's hard to say exactly because I had a fair amount of currency that was essentially wasted while I was just experimenting with different ideas and stuff to figure out what would work best, but definitely over 100 divines, so not a cheap build. Though at a base level, you can get into a Facebreaker Cyclone build really cheaply, I think. But if you wanted to get it to this kind of a level, it is going to require a fair amount of investment, depending on supply of like Forbidden Flesh and Flame jewels, and cost of the Light of Meaning jewel, all that kind of stuff, cost of Watcher's Eye. You know, there are going to be some supply and demand issues depending on how many people are doing this kind of thing, so it's not a super cheap build to get into. But not horribly expensive. It's definitely not like a mirror tier build or anything, obviously. So you can get into it, and it can be scaled up from a fairly low budget to get to this point. As you see in the background here, these are just some tier 17 maps. I'll just let clips of all tier 17 maps play here at the beginning and show you killing all the tier 17 bosses, which again was all done deathless, no problem on this character. Only uber bosses is what I've died on. So I'll just let these tier 17s play through, and then we'll go into the hideout and talk through the build, and then there will be some uber bosses and stuff at the end of the video.
Until this land is cleansed. What futile. Inevitable. You will know pain. I will bathe this world in blood. Impressive, but futile. Inevitable.
Alright, hey everybody, welcome into the hideout. We will now go through all the stuff I am doing on this character, and hopefully I won't forget anything important. So, first off, we will go through the gear. Obviously, we're using Facebreakers. One of the things that really encouraged me toward Facebreakers especially was there's a Foulborn Facebreakers here, and it replaces the crit multi, which is obviously useless on any realistic kind of Facebreaker build, with increased area of effect instead, so you actually get a useful mod there. Eventually, you do want to try and get some like this with curse enemies with vulnerability on hit, and of course you want as high of a roll as possible on that more physical damage with unarmed melee attacks. But for a temporary solution, what I was doing until I managed to get a good rolled pair with the vulnerability on hit is I was using this Battering Woolgraft that has skills used by this graft inflict vulnerability on hit. Once you get vulnerability on hit on the gloves, you can instead use a Hardening Woolgraft for Tender Embrace. So, one of the things that really encouraged me to go over Facebreakers here, as I mentioned, I'm always on the lookout for things that give flat fizz, are these new Woe Spike unique rings that came in this league. Bunch of flat fizz damage for rings and really strong impale stats. So we are using 2 Woe Spikes. You want to look for good rolls on the strength and dexterity, because we do need a fair amount of dexterity to be able to hit the requirements for a level 21 poacher's mark, which requires 159 dex. You need an okay roll on the chance to impale enemies on hit with attacks if you want to be able to hit your 100% chance to impale. Doesn't need to be like max rolls on that, but okay rolls. You want low rolls like 25-26% on the reduced impale duration. That goes up to 40, and that would start being an issue if you got like really, really low impale duration. We're hitting a little over 10 times per second, so it's okay to have around 50% combined reduced impale duration. Like, we're still going to go through all of our impales fine in that time. But with high rolls there, you would start running into issues. And then the roll on the last thing doesn't matter, because even if you have min rolls on the chance for melee hit for the strongest impale on target to last an additional hit, they'll still be over 50% when you add attack modifiers or attack catalysts with abrasive catalysts here. And that is what you want to use. And of course you want high rolls on the flat fizz as well, and use blessed orbs to get your implicits up to the max that they can go to as well, and slap on your abrasive catalysts. So together these give us a lot of flat fizz, a lot of impale chance, and they essentially give us, one extra impale that will always be on the enemy, because together they combine for 100% chance for it to last an additional hit, so you will always have one additional impale there. We are then using the Stampede. This is pretty much mandatory for any kind of a Cyclone build, just because it makes it so you can actually move at a reasonable pace while cycloning. We are a little slower, I believe, than you would typically be with the Stampede, because we're using the rune graft that increases the bonuses on your gloves and reduces the bonuses on your boots. So we are a bit extra slow, but even so, with how big our AoE is and how smooth you just get to continuously move while attacking and spamming Frostblink, I find the clear to be acceptable. Finally, any time that I'm trying to fit in like 4 or more unique items that don't have life rolls on them in a build, I'm going to be looking at Utula's Hunger. It's the best way that you're going to be able to actually hit a decent life pool while you're using lots of other uniques that don't have any life on them. So go for an Utula's Hunger. Obviously you want a good roll on the life. This one's capped out. And then for corruptions, I think this reduced extra damage from critical strikes is really solid, combined with an armor mastery on the tree that gives it, I think, like 80% reduced extra damage from critical strikes, which is another good solid defensive layer, and makes it so you can ignore crit mods on maps and such. Then, in addition to not giving life, all of the uniques I'm using are not giving resistance either. So then you've got 4 slots: helmet, amulet, shield, and belt to get all of your resistances for the character on. Obviously it would have been nice to be able to use like a Rislathas or something, but that has a life roll and no resistances. And there's some other unique belts that might be kind of cool here, but I just couldn't justify it because you need to be able to get all of your resistances in just 4 slots. So the helmet, get as much armor and resistances as you can, pretty straightforward. The shield, you want a really good chance to block roll. You can see my shield's got 45% chance to block here, and then as much evasion and resistances as you can get. The reason we go for an evasion shield rather than an armor shield is because all of the armor shields have life implicit, which would brick your Utulas and make that not work. So just really straightforward: block, defenses, resistances. Amulet, you want a topped out flat physical roll if you can get it, and then of course as much resistances as possible. And then I've also got percent armor on this, and then I've crafted the increased damage while leeching. And belt, again, you guessed it, armor and resistances, and then I've crafted the increased damage. And one nice thing is Abyss Jewels, even with life on them. Jewels do not count as equipped items, so they don't brick the bonus from Utulas. So I'd go with a Stygian Vice here, and then use a Abyss Jewel so you can get some extra life, and then also go for Flat Fizz, and in this case some Chaos Res on this to be able to cap out my Chaos Res. So between these 4 pieces, I have managed to cap out all my resistances, including Chaos Res. And as you can see, overall the gearing's really straightforward, using 5 different unique slots here, and then pretty much just armor and resistances, or defenses and resistances, on all the other slots. For our flasks, you want to fit in a writhing jar. That's pretty much standard on any kind of a Slayer build, especially when you're using the overleech node or the overkill leech node. This makes it so on bosses and anytime there's like downtime where you're needing sustain, you just pop the writhing jar, it flips out a couple of worms, you kill them instantly with your Cyclone, and that keeps your overleech going for a long time to keep up your damage reduction and your sustain. Then I just have a catalyzed Eternal Life Flask here with bleed immunity on it. Mostly corrupted blood immunity is what we want. We're immune to bleeding anyways as a Slayer, but you want to be able to take corrupted blood off of you when necessary, and I just like the fast recovery of the catalyzing mod. And then for general play, we're using a Basalt with extra armor and a Granite Flask and a Silver Flask. We don't benefit at all from the move speed on the Silver Flask, but the cast speed is nice for being able to cast our Poacher's Mark a little faster when necessary, and of course the attack speed is a good amount of extra damage as well. For other suffixes here, I've gone with reduced shock effect and reduced curse effect, just to get rid of some of the annoyances that can come up while mapping and make it so that those things do not bug you as much. That does it for the gear. We will now go into the passives. So the passive tree, we are a Slayer. We're not using a Bloodline Ascendancy or anything because the Slayer nodes are all very strong. We've gone with Impact here. This is a no-brainer for Cyclone because melee strike range gives extra AoE with Cyclone, and then this also gives additional AoE for each enemy killed, and of course you are typically close to enemies when you need to be with Cyclone, so 15% more melee damage. Then we're taking both nodes on the leech side of the thing here. Brutal Fervor here gives you that overleech and reduced damage taken while leeching, and then Endless Hunger gives you the overkill leech and some attack speed and stun immunity as well. And then we take Bane of Legends over here, makes it so you are immune to Fizz Reflect, so you can ignore that mod. We don't do enough LE damage with our Molten Shell or Frostblink or anything to worry about that, so you can run Fizz and LE Reflect maps, no problem. Gives you the 20% more damage against bosses, and then 10% more damage if you killed recently, which you can also proc with your Writhing Jar during boss fights, so essentially 30% more damage when you need it. So going through the passive tree here, we go on the attack speed side. Attack speed is something you're generally lacking with a Facebreaker setup, so that does give us more DPS than the damage side. So we go down through attack speed with Armor Evasion and Life. Go through Art of the Gladiator, Bravery, over this way through Master the Arena. We're picking up melee strike range wherever we can, because again, that is extra AoE with Cyclone. We head over here and we grab this one Impale wheel here, going down the Impale Chance side of it. We'll talk about masteries at the end. You will need to grab this Hard Knocks node unless you want to compromise on Chaos Resistance. You need to get at least 73 int to be able to use an Enlighten level 3, and there's just no way you're going to be able to do that with all of your suffixes needing to be resistance. You could, if you're willing to have sub-capped Chaos Resistance, swap one of those Chaos Resistance rolls like on your helmet for an Intelligence roll instead to save a passive point. I would rather have the Chaos Res, so take this one Intelligence passive here. Come down and go into the south end of the Slayer side. We're picking up this Bastion Breaker wheel with the hits have 50% chance to ignore physical damage reduction, and then we're also taking the Mastery for the additional 50% chance to ignore Fizz damage reduction. That makes it so you don't have to care about that map mod at all, and any enemies that happen to have like endurance charges or whatever doesn't matter to you, and these are just solid damage nodes at 14, 14, and 30 regardless. Over here we take the other Impale wheel with attack speed and chance to impale, and importantly Brutal Skewering here for Impale's last an additional hit. We're taking the Hematophagy wheel here that increases our maximum total life recovery from Leech a lot. We're always leeching and filling up our maximum recovery with Slayer, so you want a lot of maximum total recovery. Then I've taken the 5% Leech's Instant Mastery here. The additional maximum total recovery would be good as well. But at 10 hits per second, we make pretty good use of the 5% instant leech, and we're hitting so hard and have a decent amount of percent life leech between Slayer and the tree here that makes it so you are pretty well filling up the 5% that you can get from any leech instance with this 5% of instant leech. Grabbing Versatile Combatant, this is what allows us to get to 65-65 attack and spell block while we are cycloning. Obviously life here, the whole shield wheel, and grab this 1% chance to block per 5% block on equipped shield. Since we're using a shield that has 45% block, that's an additional 9% block for that one passive mastery. Very solid there. We're grabbing an endurance charge and a frenzy charge here, and this is where I've flipped in a light of meaning with increased physical damage. I think it is quite likely that you could probably use a lethal pride here that would give more damage than the light of meaning. This is an okay light of meaning spot. I think we have 22 or 23 passives in the radius, so it is a lot of physical damage. The reason I did not want to use the lethal pride, even though it might be able to give more damage with, melee damage and double damage and life, because we do have a lot of notables here, is unfortunately a lethal pride does just clip this iron reflexes node here, which would turn it into something you don't want. And you don't strictly need the iron reflexes, but since we are using this evasion shield to avoid the life implicit, that's a lot of extra armor by taking iron reflexes. Stampede also has a decent amount of evasion on it, and then a teeny weeny little bit from your Facebreakers here as well, which doesn't really matter. But overall, I do think the iron reflexes is worth it. It's a lot of extra armor with this shield. Then we take this nice little wheel that has melee damage plus melee strike range. Again, that's more AoE on our Cyclone, and then we also take the attack mastery for extra melee strike range for even more range. Over here to the left, heading up, we grab this little fortify wheel for all the max fortification, and then grab the mastery that makes melee hits fortify. That keeps us at 23 fortify all the time. We grab this life wheel, and then that's where I've just grabbed a random mastery and put on this rune graft with the bound. As you can see, 20% reduced bonuses from boots and 20% increased from gloves. This makes it so our, 992 here up to 1,000 more physical damage with unarmed melee attacks can add you up to an extra 200% with this increased bonuses grant from equipped gloves. So that is a lot of extra damage by taking that rune graft. We take this first rage wheel here up to Veteran's Wrath. I see a lot of people skip this wheel even when they're going for some rage on builds, and I really think that's a mistake. You get a good amount of max rage here, you get 3 rage on melee hit, and I really think this 1 second of delayed inherent rage loss makes a significant difference in how often you're actually able to keep up max rage while mapping and during bosses when they're doing phase transitions, and you can pop worms to extend that as well by getting an extra hit. So I think this wheel is well worth it. We take a mastery here for the increased maximum total life recovery while at maximum rage. Continuing up to the left here, we're taking all the life and armor we go by. We're grabbing this shield damage and block wheel here. This also gives us endurance charge on kill. Not super important just because we are using some cluster jewel things to get endurance charges while channeling anyways. But regardless, it gets them up really quickly. And it gives us access to another shield mastery where we can take this 2% increased attack damage per 75 armor or evasion on shield. At 2200 evasion here, this 1 point is giving us 58% increased physical damage. So that's a very, very strong damage node. Another endurance charge, and then over here we're taking a Watcher's Eye. The most critical most critical mod by far here is the impales you inflict lasts 2 additional hits while using Pride, and then I've also gone with the 12% chance to deal double damage while using Pride. For this armor mastery, I'm taking, as I mentioned, that reduced extra damage from critical strikes, which combined with the corrupted mod on our chest here gives us very little extra damage taken from critical strikes. Finally, up to Resolute Technique, of course, to solve our accuracy problems so that we don't need any accuracy, and we're taking this other Rage Wheel for a lot of extra maximum rage, and then the Mastery for more extra maximum rage. Back down here, other masteries we're taking the 10% chance on hitting an enemy for all impales to last for an additional hit, and we are also taking the impale damage ignores physical damage reduction. So between that and this wheel, both our hit damage and our impale damage ignores enemy physical damage reduction. One interesting thing to note is that this 12% double damage has a little bit of extra impact for us compared to what it would for most builds, because these rings together make it so that our strongest impale essentially lasts infinitely. So one double damage proc from our 12 is going to create a double strength impale, which will essentially be perpetuated or put forward in perpetuity by these woe spikes. So you'll have that one really strong impale going forever. And then finally here, we are using a cluster jewel setup to fill out the rest of the block we need and get some good damage to be able to get to our 65-65 block while channeling. So we are using a 8 passiver here with attack damage while holding a shield. These little bits of attributes I have, like the two all attributes here, and then on my mediums I also have some 4 all attributes. I've got some extra dexterity. Those are relevant. You can see I'm just barely over the 73 int I need and the 155 dex I need. So that is a bit of a pain to fit in, but you are going to need to look for a little bit of extra attributes on these. Ideally, a dexterity intelligence amulet here would make that a little easier rather than strength intelligence. But these nodes were just, or this amulet was just way too good, so I snapped it up even though it wasn't on an ideal base. So anyways, you want to go for Feed the Fury because that is just the best damage node you can get on a Slayer because you're always leeching even when you're full, and 30% damage, 15% attack speed is disgusting on one node. For your other prefix notable, I recommend Strike Leader here. Gives you good damage and block, and again strike range, which is more radius on our Cyclone. And then you want to go for Martial Prowess for the attack speed and damage combined for your suffix notable. Then we are using 2 medium clusters that have the same notables. We're going for Stoic Focus, which is a lot of block along with 25 damage, and then Enduring Focus, which is damage, and combined the two of them together is 50% chance to gain an endurance charge each second while channeling. So that makes it so our endurance charges stay up all the time, even when we're not killing stuff and getting endurance charges from Aggressive Bastion. Then finally down here, Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame, very importantly for Master of Metal from the Champion Ascendancy. Master of Metal gives you an average of 9 physical damage for each impale on the enemy. Between our Woe Spikes and Brutal Skewering, and the 1 extra that Master of Metal itself gives, and the 2 extra from Watcher's Eye, and then I'll talk about the Violent Desire buff here in a sec. We should have an average of 12 impales on an enemy after we ramp for a little under 2 seconds, which means a lot of extra flat physical damage, which is obviously multiplied by our Facebreaker into a huge amount. That does it for the passive tree. I will mention that we have Anointed Charisma on our amulet here, and then we have Anointed Whispers of Doom on our boots. The Stampede are Blight boots, which means they get to have an Anoint on them as well, which is normally restricted to the amulet socket. So that gives us Whispers of Doom for an extra curse so that we can do Poacher's Mark on top of the vulnerability on hit from our Facebreakers. For our grafts here, the Ool grafts can all have flat physical damage as a prefix, so there's yet another good chunk of flat physical damage to add onto your Facebreaker damage. Then this Impaling Ool graft here gives us a little bit of chance to impale, which makes it so you can be a little under on these Woe Spikes and still hit 100% chance. And then very importantly, it gives us this very, very powerful Violent Desire buff. For the mods on this, you want to go for the increased cooldown recovery rate and increased skill effect duration. With those two together, we have like greater than 90% uptime on the Violent Desire. It only goes down for like a second before it reprocs again and lasts another, almost 11 seconds. As you can see, this buff grants 22% increased effective impale, which is very solid on its own, but very importantly, 30% chance to inflict an additional impale on enemies that you impale. So you can take your, max number of impales and just multiply it by 1.3, so you get a lot of extra damage, especially with that flat damage per impale from Master of Metal. For the Pantheon here, we are taking Brine King for freeze immunity. We obviously don't care about the stun stuff since we're stun immune entities anyways, but the freeze immunity and the reduced effective chill is good. And then I recommend Rislotha here. Hybrid flasks like the Writhing Jar count as life flasks, so this will just make it so that between long boss phases or whatever, you're always able to pop a Writhing Jar to keep up your leech. Now we will go through the gem links on this character, and I'll mention a bit about reservation here. You need 10% mana reservation efficiency on your helmet, and then you're going to want an Enlightened 3 to go with 3 of your R's here. between those and the Charisma Anoint, it lets us fit in everything that we need to without having to spend any extra on getting like a mana mastery or anything here. So we're using Enlighten with Flesh and Stone, Determination, and Pride up here. Over on the side, we're using Blood and Sand for another reservation. We are using Blood Rage linked with Automation. You don't have to have this automated, but I think it's pretty nice to just never have to actually press that Blood Rage button. Makes it up all the time, get a lot of life leech and attack speed that way. For our main links here, we are using Cyclone of Tumult, Pulverize, Life Tap, Awakened Melee Fizz, Infused Channeling, which again is 14% less damage taken from hits while channeling on top of everything else, and we're using Awakened Brutality. Life Tap here, because we're using these double woe spikes, because we kind of needed to use an Utulas with all the other things we're using, we couldn't do any of the general solutions that people use, like a minus mana cost chest or multiple minus mana cost crafts on jewelry. So I said, screw it, we'll just reserve all of our mana and just life tap everything. Seemed like the most practical solution to the issues I was trying to figure out with sustain. Down here in the Facebreakers, we have a cast when damage taken and Molten Shell linked to life tap, and then we've also put our War Banner in here to take advantage of the life tap as well. The War Banner, not super impactful. Honestly, I forget to press it most of the time anyways, but you can pop it when you've got a good amount of stacks for a nice boost of extra damage. And then finally down here in our Stampede, we have Poacher's Mark and Frost Blink linked with Life Tap and Empower. Those extra levels are nice extra flat fizz on the Poacher's Mark. And since our intelligence is pretty low, we can't level our Frost Blink very high, so the extra 3 levels there from the Empower is nice for some extra cooldown recovery as well. And then of course the Stampede also give you some cooldown recovery rate of travel skills, though that is lessened by the Rune Graft we're using. So I think that pretty well explains everything. While you're mapping, all you're really going to be doing is just holding Cyclone all the time and Frost Blinking. Very smooth, comfortable clear. I will put Uber boss fights at the end of this video, and I'll talk through a couple of those, I suppose, narrate over a little bit, discuss what was going on. Overall, very solid build. I hope you are inspired to go out and try some off-meta things by these videos. That's my main goal with these, not so much to really be build guides to copy, but more inspiration to say, hey, you can do things that are off-meta, and they can turn out great if you put enough thought and effort into them. And this one turned out very, very excellent. Definitely strong build of the league. I might do one more build this league, not totally sure, but I have thoroughly enjoyed it. Thought the new Breach stuff is really cool overall, even though I have largely been ignoring it lately because the market is kind of saturated with whatever good rares you were going to get, and I just don't think there's a ton of profit to be had unless you get really lucky on a currency or a unique item drop. So I'm just skipping Breach in most maps at this point, but overall, very solid league. I've been loving the builds that I've come up with this league so far. If you want to see more content like this, be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see y'all later. The first couple of Uber fights I'll put here are just Uber Shaper and Uber Elder. These ones are pretty comfortable to do deathless as long as you have sufficient defenses to be able to tank a couple of hits during the bullet hell phases. The fights are really straightforward and not really that different from the regular version of the fights as long as you have good damage and can tank a couple of those bullet hells. So we'll let these ones play through first. These are the easy deathless ones, and then we'll go into some of the other ones.
Insignificant. To save the future, the past must be sacrificed. Ultimate chaos. Spoil and fester. I'll do something.
Alright, next up here we've got a quick Uber Eater fight. Pretty straightforward overall, but not one I have a lot of experience with, so I just really didn't know what to expect in terms of damage from the big tentacle slam. So I thought it wouldn't really do that much damage to me, so during the ball phase I was like, whatever, I can just Frost Blink into this tentacle slam to collect the last ball to power up. Turns out that was not the case, and even with my pretty good defenses on this character, it was enough to one-shot me. So we'll know that for the future. I cannot tank easily large tentacle slams from Uber Eater, but as you can see, he goes down really fast because our damage is really high, so not a big problem overall, and a pretty simple fight. Finally here, I'll put up an Uber Maven. Obviously this is a fairly long fight because of all the phases and stuff, but again our damage holds up fine and no real issues overall. I do eat a couple deaths during this one. This is just not a fight I'm not even sure if I've ever done Uber Maven before, maybe once on another character, but definitely not something I've done a lot. So I wasn't really familiar with the timing on her big fireball attack, so I eat one of those and die. And then also I just had no idea that in the Uber version of the fight, her vertical lasers also disable recovery like the rotating lasers do. So I thought I could just tank the vertical lasers and be fine, but of course they turn off my recovery, and I do die for that in the final phase. The last phase memory game with the rotating lasers is a little difficult on this character just because we do have pretty bad movement speed. So you gotta be pretty quick at moving around and using your Frost Blink over the lasers appropriately to actually get through that memory phase. But we do it okay, but again, just die because I didn't realize that those vertical lasers from that attack also turn off your recovery. So couple deaths here, and only deaths on this character are during Uber fights, so overall very happy with it. Based on the overall high damage and defenses of the build, I think somebody who is very skilled at the Uber fights could probably do all of them deathless with this build. But that is not me. I didn't even attempt any of the others. Just not really interested in them, especially when I think of like X-Arc. I am so bad at the ball phase, and I just think that fight is cancer overall with the fire grates on the ground and everything. So I didn't try that. Maybe I will get around to trying some of the extra Ubers on this character. But overall, I'm not that interested in Uber fights because most of the time you're just losing money by doing them unless you get really, really lucky. And, I don't know. I think they're too restrictive of content in general for most builds, so I don't worry about them. But since this character does have very high damage, I figured, what the heck, I'll go ahead and do some Ubers. And they went fine. This character is plenty strong for the Ubers. So, again, thank you guys for watching. I'll let the rest of this fight play out. Subscribe if you want to see more. I'll see you next time.
Be an escape. Scurry, scurry. Take this. The prettiest. Stand still. The prettiest. A cascade of pain. Do what I say. Open fire.
The living toy must enjoy our content.